Good evening, and welcome to What's Up With That, a podcast. And you're joining me, your host, Don Brenton. I'm glad that you're with us and hope that you enjoy our conversation this evening because it's going to be awesome. We are in an election year, and we understand that it is crazy in this election season. So, and I'm going to say that the Spirit of God pricks me, and somehow I just felt compelled that we need to address the issue of politics. And for me, church and politics, there's been said that a whole lot of folk will possibly sit out this election. It's a critical election. It's a critical election for this nation, for this country, and I'm going to be specific. I think it's a critical election for people of color and for me, black folk. Oftentimes, the folk who sit out, and they're varying as we listen to news today. The folk who are expected to sit out, not seeing a viable candidate, are a lot of people, but oftentimes we find those people in the church. And this podcast is What's Up With That. It's hosted by me, Don Brenton, your host. And I'm concerned about all of this nation, all of this country. In particular, I'm concerned about Black church and how we engage the political process. Often we talk about separation of church and state. And so the church oftentimes does not want to get involved in politics in a deep way. For me, it's ironic, right? Because in these seasons, in our black churches, and I can't speak for anybody else, I do know in our black churches, we are inundated with politicians. From governors to call it state representatives, city council. When it's election time, our churches are full. But somewhere we talk about separation of church and state. I think maybe there's a line that we do not cross, but I think sometimes we don't get close enough to the line to really have an impact. And oftentimes we cite separation of church and state. On this evening, I want to engage the conversation. Politics, not in my church. What's up with that? And help us in the conversation on this evening, I have a special guest, and it is none other than Dr. Eric McDaniel. How you doing, my brother?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
We are glad you're here. And I was excited because I was seeking folk to engage me in this conversation. It was pressing enough for me that I was ready to engage in this conversation in the form of dialogue, right?
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been much of a conversation. And was talking to a friend, and your name came up. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, he teaches a class over at UT in Black church and politics. And my, just ding, 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 ding. It went off. So he did. I asked, could I get your contact information? He granted me that. I made a call, and you are here.
Yes.
Thank you, my friend, for being here on this day. Now, I've mentioned your name, Dr. Eric McDaniel, professor on the campus of the University of Texas. And I'm going to ask, tell us more about yourself.
So I'm originally from the St. Louis area and went to high school in Northern Virginia. Day after graduating from high school, moved to Alabama. 6 weeks later, I'm up in Central Ohio, Wilberforce. So the oldest private HBCU. So the first, the finest, the future.
That's up that way, right?
Yeah.
Because Houston-Tillotson is the oldest private HBC in this city, right?
Yeah.
I just had to say that. I'm sorry.
Hey, there's a fight over it all the time. Then went to grad school at the University of Illinois, and I've been here at the University of Texas since 2003.
Wow.
And my work focuses on black politics, religion and politics, and also have an interest in health policy.
Okay.
And my first book examined why some churches choose to become politically engaged and others choose not to. And my most recent book, which came out a couple years ago, focuses on religious nationalism in the U.S. and what does this mean for American politics.
Religious nationalism.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So you are also author. I like your first one. What was it, The Black Church and Black Politics?
Yeah, it's Politics in the Pews, yes.
Okay. Gosh, maybe you should have bought a book. We could lift it up and say, buy this book.
Yeah, I should have brought it with me.
Buy the book anyway. We're going to have you announce what that book is again before we leave on this evening. So then you delve into that whole political
Yes.
environment and what that means in the Black church.
Yes.
You've heard some of what I've said in terms of an introduction. Would you agree with me or not in terms of too often what we find is that members of our Black churches oftentimes, rather than take a side or engage deeply into the political arena, that sometimes we back out and espouse the separation of church and state, so I really don't need to engage that. And sometimes while many are out there voting, and there are churches that are actively engaging, but far too many sometimes sit out and decide to take the middle road and not vote at all because there's not a candidate that I like.
Yeah.
What do you think about that statement and your response?
I think it's really important. One of the things we do know is that people who go to church are more likely to vote, and people who go to churches where they hear a political message or are reminded to vote are even more likely to vote. And so going to church does promote voting, but having the church talk about it gets you, you're more likely to vote. I also think that there is a concern that if churches aren't talking about voting, it's a question of why. There was, this is well over 20 years ago, I remember the woman running for governor it was a Republican running for governor of New Jersey, and they were trying to figure out how she won. And her strategist said, we paid off all the black preachers. And he said, you said it was just a joke, but it was a little too close to home.
Can you say more? Because I remember growing up, and I grew up a child in church in the 60s, right? And every now and then I just remembered, the worst thing that adults sometimes do is assume that a child is too busy engaging in other things to listen.
Yes.
When children are oftentimes listening, and they'll listen closely to adult conversations, right? And I just remember someone talking about city council, etc., and you might hear someone say, "Oh, they didn't pay him off," right? So, can you say a little bit more about that? And in terms of politics, Black church.
Well, there's this concern that a fear that churches can be bought off, and so while there was no evidence of what was going on in the case of New Jersey, if we moved to New York City when Mayor Michael Bloomberg was mayor, there was a concern about, or some interest in why black churches weren't mobilizing in cases of police brutality under his administration when they had done it under other administrations. And one of the things that came out that many pastors admitted is like, well, he gives money to us. He supports our things, so we give him a little bit more slack.
So are you saying, I'm not sure when this happened, but are you suggesting that in this new millennial that there is the possibility that black preachers can be bought politically?
I I think historically we've seen examples of that. There you have the examples of the white business helping out the black church. And so when the civil rights movement came around, they're like, well, we don't want to say anything bad about him because he paid for our new parking spots. Reverend William Barber III, in his book, Third Reconstruction, talks about holding a meeting, I want to say it was in Western North Carolina, where there were some workers on strike, and it was supposed to be a meeting with both the white clergy and black clergy together. Well, the owner of the company changed the schedule around, met with the white clergy separately, then met with the black clergy. And that's the one Reverend Barber was attending. And it was interesting because the owner came in and was shaking the minister's hands. Hey, you remember when I paid for this? You remember when I paid for that? And so because of this, they now feel beholden to that individual. Yeah. And this becomes an issue. We know most black churches are in a situation where they're trying to keep the doors open, and they'll take whatever they can get. Not all of them are like Abyssinian in Harlem. And so what puts them in a very compromising situation. So that is one thing to be aware of when we're trying to understand why churches do some of the things that they do.
Okay, so are you suggesting, and then with that, it sounds like you've done a decent job saying that, hey, maybe I'm not so right, that what I have thought the counter is true. Being in church, you're more likely to vote. What I think I'm hearing is that the concern might be that depending on where you are, what church you are part of,
yes,
that it's not the members that we ought to be terribly concerned about. It's the influence that the person who is pastoring the church that we need to be concerned about.
I think in many ways, I think it's both.
Okay.
So we used to say it was all about the pastor. The pastor dictated everything.
Right.
But I've been a member of a church where the pastor, they changed the locks of the pastor. I've seen plenty of pastors.
To the pastor?
Excuse me?
You said they went to the pastor?
They changed the locks.
Okay, they changed the locks.
Yeah. So he showed up one Sunday, his key wasn't working. So they changed the locks on.
We can be rough sometimes, can't we?
Yeah. I've seen places where they didn't like the pastor for some reason, they were trying to get rid of him. And so they were calling the bishop about, hey, we need somebody new. So I do believe the pastor has a very big role. The pastor helps set the tone, but the members play a very big role as well, because if the members don't want to hear it, nothing's going to happen.
Right. And
the best example I can think of is with Vernon Johns, who was the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist before King. He was very active. He wanted to do a lot of things, but the members just didn't want to do it. Okay. And then when King came along, they allowed him to do it. But the pastors and the members matter. The message is being sent. If you're in a church that is actively sending a message about, we need to think about the poor, we need to think about the less fortunate, you're going to be more politically active. If you're in a church that is very either otherworldly or is focused on how your faith can bring you material rewards, you're gonna be less politically engaged.
Again, and I think I would agree with that. Always excited. The pastor where I attend on Sunday actively encouraging folk to go out and vote.
Yes.
I don't know what you're gonna do, but I'm gonna go vote.
Yes.
We all need to vote, right? But is there more? Right? When I ask, is there more? I think of Jeremiah Wright.
Yes.
Right. Others who were pastors but almost activists.
Yes.
Also remember that kings rise to the level of I'm not getting the right words here, but of history making, right? Became more real in his death than in his life. right? The churches who acquiesce, perhaps
Yes.
that's the word, were more numbered than the churches who advocated,
Yes.
right? Do you see that true today in 2024? And if so, can we counter that? And I asked him to counter it. Well, go ahead with that one, then I'll ask you.
That's the common thing is for the churches to not engage, the churches to not do these things. And if you read King's letter for the Birmingham jail, not only is he critiquing white clergy, he's also critiquing black clergy. You see a whole new denomination form, probably over the fight over the civil rights movement. I remember shortly after I graduated from college, the summer after I graduated from college, I was in South Africa. I was talking to some ministers, and they talked about how they didn't participate in the anti-apartheid movement because their members would be embarrassed bailing them out of jail.
Okay.
And now there are other cases where the pastors where the women in the church literally drugged the pastors to the meetings. So look, if our children are here, you're going to be here. There's a book by Charles Payne, I've Got the Light of Freedom, where he talks about SNCC and organizing in the Delta. And he talks about one church meeting.
When you say talk about SNCC, can you, for some,
I'm sorry, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Okay.
And they were very active in the civil rights movement. So this is where you see Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture coming out of, John Lewis. And so they're down in the Delta getting people registered to vote and trying to get people to step out and register to vote and get the churches active. They have one church meeting, and the way it's described is that, people are being called out as cowards before God for not being active in the movement, and their members laughed at them. And so a lot of times the members had to shame the pastors into doing something. And so it's what I think is going to, it's a back and forth. The members influence the pastor influences the members, but one of them has to want to do it in order for you see this action.
One, okay, if we're influencing each other, so one has to want to do it to be able to influence the other. And I'm trying to get that in my mind, because a part of me says wouldn't both have to want to, but that's part of the influence that we play, right? I may not want to, but if your influence is strong enough, you might move to that level. Okay. So we find more folk voting in the church. Perhaps then the counterpart to that would be, what part and what obligation does the church have then to be that influence, right? And we always hear the church needs to be the influence in the world, and not the other way around. Does the church come out of its walls in these political times to encourage others? And maybe I'm talking to myself as I think of students, right? I am chaplain. As I think of students, and we did a thing a few weeks ago. It's one thing to get them registered to vote. It's another to get them to actually go to the polls and vote.
Yes.
What's the responsibility in terms of the influence that the church perhaps ought to have beyond its walls to yield its influence to get folk to actually vote?
So when I first started doing this, my expectation is, no, the churches need to be out there. They need to be doing all of these things. But one of the things I realized is that a lot of churches are struggling to keep the doors open.
Okay.
And the first thing they need to do is make sure they keep the doors open. Okay. And that the political activity and the activism is a byproduct of having enough people there. That their first goal, their first responsibility is the members keeping the doors open, and once they have enough resources, they can do these things. And I've seen plenty of churches where the pastor was willing and the members seemed willing, but they just didn't have the resources.
Okay. Now, when you say resources, because I'm going to ask what resources are needed to yield your influence.
Yes.
So when you say that sometimes they're not engaging or active because their first responsibility is to the church, right? Are there not some things that you can do that does not require finances, that just requires a bit of your time? And indeed, I'm going to go to Micah, if we pick up on that, what does the Lord require of me? We're so busy talking about what God wants you to do, what God don't want you to do.
Yeah.
And we're so busy concentrating on the do's and don'ts, the cussing, the clubbing, the whatever else, that we forget about that piece that says that what does the Lord require of you but to love justice.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
To engage in mercy and to walk humbly. How much are you going to love your God? And is that love exemplified by some of the other things you say, right?
Yeah.
All I can get from God.
Yes.
If we are indeed, wherever you are in the spectrum, understanding that the two greatest commandments that God gives us is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, all your being.
Yes.
The second one is likened unto it, to love your neighbor as yourself. That's relational.
Yes.
That's concern about humanity. I may do a whole lot of other things, but I understand God's mercy and God's grace, and there ought to be some limitations. But if I truly understand the two greatest commands, then somewhere I've got to be concerned about other humans. And out of that, ought that be enough to compel me to move for the sake of justice? And I want to, in a minute, bring you into our present. But
yes, that should compel people to move. One of my favorite sermons or speeches from Dr. King is "But If Not," and he talks about this. Well, I'll go out and do this if it doesn't rain. I'll go out if nobody calls me a name. I'll go out and do this if I won't go to jail. But if you look back at the biblical stories, it's but if not. If this happens, I'm still going to do it. And we have this attitude of, well, that's a little too much work. I don't want to do that. And protecting the poor, so, this might be a bit facetious when I say this, but I would say, we don't want to clothe the naked because we don't like their fashion style, and we don't want to feed the poor because they got poor table manners. We've got all these excuses of not doing these things. But the issue is it requires you to give of yourself.
Okay.
And that is very difficult for people to do.
Yeah. But what it also says, though, is that you got the resource. It's not about, it's not about resource, because some of it doesn't require your dollar.
Yes.
Right? You've got the resource. Are you willing to use it?
Yeah, I think so. When I think about resources, one part of it is money, but part of it also is understanding how politics works.
Okay.
And what you'll find is you will have a congregation that wants to do something, but they really don't know what to do, or but really it doesn't really take a lot. Just remind people, hey, vote. You can contact somebody and get sample ballots to hand out.
You can educate folk on people running and the issues.
Yes,
that are out there.
You can do that, but if so, when I say resource, I'm not just talking about money, but I'm also talking about like the intellectual capital and things like that to explain things to your members, and then also the having somebody, because the pastor can't do all of this, but having somebody who can collect that information and properly communicate it to the congregation.
Yeah. And part of me says that those resources are also free and easy to attain.
Yes, they are.
Right?
Yeah.
So again, in my mind, it asks, what's the real problem? Right?
Yeah.
Because there are too many agencies who want to come out and talk to your congregation and inform your congregation.
Yes.
There are too many folk who want to come out and register. There are too many folk who want to come out so that they can let you know about these issues because they're impacting your community, right? That's, to me, the easier part.
It is, because there are people reaching out, but I'm thinking about the members who will be able to communicate with them effectively, but also trust.
Okay.
That there are clear concerns of trust. That's when I was working on the first book and I had to go, you spend a lot of time like, who are you? What you doing here? They're just concerned about trust, and churches don't want to be used.
Right. But isn't that then, that's where the pastor comes in to be that bridge, right? Because if they trust the pastor, and the pastor brings them in, or the pastor approves of their coming in,
Yes.
then 9 times out of 10 going to trust you. Now, I think whoever you are, because I'm going to also say, and having pastored, pastor is not end all be all. Even as the pastor talks to you and encourages you, you still need to go do some homework yourself.
Yes.
Right? But he, she is often that bridge that makes it okay and that opens up people to receive the knowledge and all the other stuff.
Yeah, the pastor is a great way of opening up the doors and getting people engaged. And also if you have members prominent members, they can do the work. But if the pastor is open to someone coming in, if the pastor really wants something to happen and talk about it, the member's going to hear it. And the members may not like it. Maybe they may hear it only one time because they tell the pastor, no, we don't want to hear this anymore. But it gets the conversation going. And there's a really good literature that demonstrates that, when the pastor talks about something, it does resonate with people. And there is the power of the pulpit, and they need to use it more. I know they're concerned about the tax exempt status. That's telling you, okay, don't say go vote for somebody, but that's different than talking about the issues. Saying we need to expand voting rights is political, but it's not partisan.
Right.
Saying that we need a reasonable minimum wage, that's reality.
It's reality.
And I think one of the things that churches can do, and I think if churches do engage in these things, they will probably get more committed members, is provide that information.
Because as we see the challenges of the church today, sometimes a struggle, right? Again, mainline denominations is struggling.
Yes.
Right? Struggling for members, struggling because of how millennials, maybe not so much the generation before them, but certainly the millennials, disease coming up, and other generations. You had, boom, I'm a boomer, right?
Yeah.
So even there, you had some folk who distrusted the church. So in every generation it's there, but it's growing and it's increasing. And some of the issues are the fact that we don't engage, right? And some of these pertinent issues that are critical to society as a whole, to Black people in particular. And so to engage, maybe that's a two-sided prong, but to engage might be helping a generation of folk who can't see the value in church because, well, let's say, sometimes we're so heavenly bound that we're not forget that we're seeing the church being so heavenly bound. And that it's not impacting what I need to deal with this world right now. It's not helping me understand the issues and the terms so that I understand that this election in 2024 is a critical election and there's a reason that I should vote, period.
Yep. Dr. King said clearly when talking about, a religion that doesn't talk about the here and now, that doesn't talk about the problems people are going through is a dry as dust religion. And if the church is not active in doing these things, you end up with a lot of people wondering why you're here.
Yeah.
And there's research that's demonstrated that when churches get active in the community, not necessarily politically active, but they are participating in food banks, they are showing up to help kids get backpacks, things like that, that it actually increases membership. Not only does it increase membership, members feel a much stronger connection with each other and the church. And so you get a stronger commitment and greater identification with the institution. This thing we're seeing right now, where a lot of people want to just go in and go out. They don't feel like volunteering. They don't feel like raising money. You lose community there. When you had the church that was actively doing things in the community that required members to volunteer to do certain things, you were able to build that community. You were able to get those people who were going to be like, no, this is my church. I'm going to be here, and feel a sense of ownership. But right now, instead of feeling like you own the church, you feel like you're leasing the church.
Okay. Could that possibly be also because maybe we're not connecting dots? You said it's not political, but we will feed the hungry. Mm-hmm. Aren't those political issues? And while we label them as service project, service work, and it is indeed that, right?
Yes.
And you hear oftentimes, is that something, the government gets too far in it, is that something the church ought to be doing, right? Mm-hmm. Is there a way that maybe we can blend the two? And I guess what I'm saying is that maybe the difference will come when, for it just to be service was good a while back. I need to see it in a different kind of way. So if I can understand that what I'm doing is providing a service that perhaps government is a political issue, right? That's why they give us money.
Yeah.
That's why they can buy us out.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's a political issue that they're finding ways to deal with it so that they can take their hands off and give it to you, but we're going to call it service.
Yes.
It's okay because it is service, but for our congregants and to understand some of the issues when we get to political seasons and know what some of the issues are and the concerns are, they need to understand the political aspects of that and the political dimensions.
Yes.
Right? So that we can connect the dots and understand why we need to vote.
Yeah.
Why we need to be engaged.
I agree fully. And I think in many ways the service work can contribute to that, because the more active you are in your community, the more you realize there are things that need to be resolved in your community. Yeah. And then you're gonna be like, well, why isn't this resolved? Well, City Hall needs to do something about this. And so you think locally. One of the problems that several pastors told me is their churches are located, in the city, but the members lived out in the suburbs.
Exactly.
So the members didn't understand what was actually going on in their community. But if you have more activities in that immediate community, the members are more aware of it. Even though they may live in the suburbs, they know, oh, something needs to be done here.
Okay. And is it even, because that's very real, right? Mm-hmm. I think one of the issues that Austin is struggling with right now is how do you be Black church in this city in East Austin that has become gentrified.
Yes.
That is very wide.
Yes.
Where you can find a whole bunch of little white church upstarts in East Austin, right? Does it mean something? I'm going to say I'm one of those who live out. I'm on the verge of retiring. What I'm also looking at is how do I engage my community out, right? So that I can know what some of the issues are there. If nothing else, even if we are in the inner city, because sometimes we can't vote in issues that are relevant to Austin, but we can in Pflugerville or Round Rock.
Yes.
Right? But at least here I can be, in this sense, this is where I want to worship.
Yes.
I can be pricked to say, while maybe I cannot contribute here in the political process, I still have that same obligation
Yes.
to the community where I live. And there are enough of us who are driving in that there's got to be some issues that affect us in those communities where we call, quote unquote, suburbs or small towns
Yes.
that have now become suburbs of Austin, right?
Yes.
But they're still independent. There's still issues that affect the community. There's still issues that will affect people of color out there. So we can be pricked and we can learn and we can take it with us.
Yeah. So Austin is a great example of this, of where you're seeing a lot of this happen in major cities. So at one point, the white people lived in the city, and then they moved out to the suburbs, and black people moved in. Now you're seeing the reverse.
I think a few years ago I went to a few conferences. They used to call it, they're closing the donut.
Yeah.
They're closing the donut.
And it's so now that the black folks are moving out to the suburbs, they're moving out to these new areas, which means one thing you know about the suburbs is a lot more space.
Right.
But that space means you're further away from services. And if we're thinking about people moving out to Manor and Hutto, places that were fairly rural, 15 years ago, there are a lot of services, a lot of infrastructure that still needs to be built. And so the people who are moving into Austin, that infrastructure is already there. Then on top of that, you put the toll road in. So now I got to pay a fee to come into the city. That we need to be aware of this. We need to be aware of, okay, where I'm living now, and we know Austin is still highly segregated, that I need to be aware of what resources are available. And churches need to be able to talk about that. They need to be able to talk about what's going on, not just in Travis County, but in Williamson County and the surrounding counties, because they're serving those communities. Whether or not they're physically there, they're members of there, so that means they're serving those communities.
We are in the schools out there, our kids.
Yes.
In the schools. There are some issues.
Yes.
Anyway, and I'm going to say, as far as Austin is concerned, most of us is to move down. And I'm like, I love it. Anyway, I'm going somewhere else because we can see us out there. So how do we deal with those issues? And maybe since we're coming in, the church can help us understand our responsibility.
Yes.
Not only here in Austin, but our responsibility in those places where we live, where our kids go to school, and where we recreation when we're not coming into work or coming into church in the city.
Yeah, and I believe churches should do that, but I always come back to the members. That a lot of times the members don't want to hear it, because one of the things about it is this now requires them to act when they don't want to.
So that's a whole nother side of the coin, right?
Yeah.
So that's movement. I know, I have knowledge, I understand, but like, I want to chill.
Yeah.
I don't pay my deal. I pay my dues. I understand it's our problem, but I need somebody else to go ahead and do the work. All right. Yeah. I guess that's fair. And how do we then influence, encourage folks to understand that wherever you are, that you ought to be concerned about building a future for your child. That wherever you are, the young folk who their parents left Austin, I think there was a black flight north when I got here.
Yes.
Right?
I'm up north too, yeah.
30 years ago. Your children have grown up there, and some of your children are staying there. What are we doing to make it a viable place?
Yes.
For those who are coming after us? Do we not have a responsibility, for me, as those who express to be followers of God, seeking to do justice? You need some justice for your children out there. What are school systems like? How you got to get involved? That's some justice issues out there. How do we understand that? And how are we able to engage that? And that also means how then do we vote?
Yes.
Because that becomes a part of it. God says, Jesus, render to Caesar's what Caesar's, unto God's what God's. I'm just crazy enough to believe that there's some things, we have to adhere to. laws, etc. But there's also that piece that says, be concerned about justice.
Yes.
And so that means I got to do something, because you got to be accountable, because the Lord says, right?
Yeah.
And how do we fuse that?
So I go back to King's letter from the Birmingham jail, where he talks about there are just laws and unjust laws.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm challenging are the unjust laws. And the problem that I think the church has, the problem that a lot of people have, of staying informed in politics. You got all these other things going on, and staying informed in politics is one more thing. And they don't really understand how this impacts them. And I think also the loss of local newspapers means people are less informed about what's going on locally. So we know who the president is, we know who the senators are, but we don't know who our mayor is. We don't know who's on our city council. We don't know who's on our school board. And because of this, we are unaware of the people who are actually having a day-to-day impact on our lives. So whatever Congress does, that may not impact your life for maybe 2 or 3 years, but who's on the city council dictates when your trash gets picked up and if it gets picked up. Who's on the school board dictates whether or not your child will, get into gifted and talented programs or not, whether or not they will track your child for college or non-college. That these are things to be aware of. And the greatest harm coming to black people is local level decisions, not decisions being made in DC. So I think about Ferguson, Missouri. Ferguson, whenever they had their elections, they were off-year elections. So they weren't doing the presidential election. Predominantly black city, but had a predominantly white city council and mayor, because they wouldn't turn up to vote in the off-year elections. And what happened with Michael Brown probably would have been avoided if black folks had turned up in the off-year elections. And my question is, where were the institutions? So where were the churches? Where were the fraternities and sororities? Where were the black institutions to make sure people turned out during this time when there's less information? But these are the people that dictate your life more so than others. If you're worried about how the police treat you, that's not Harris or Trump dictating that. That's your city council and your mayor and your state. You need to be more aware of that. And if you're more aware of that, you can protect yourself.
Okay. I guess that's going to be sort of my lead-in, and I think it's great. There's responsibility, I'm hearing. There are a lot of factors playing into that, but bottom line is, and maybe help me with my bottom line, maybe is clergy who are informed, who know how to resource, and who are honest, not seeking to tell you who to vote for.
Yes.
But seeking to inform you and at least resource you, equip you with what you needed so that you can make informed decisions and give you the confidence, and maybe that's something, right? To give you the confidence to go out and vote, and in the same vein, influence others.
Yes.
To go out and vote. I just believe it's somewhere that influence that ought to be the church ought to be seen in a variety of ways, and one of them ought to show up in the political arena as Christian, as church, to influence politics and to influence others, to be sure. I like what you've just said, and I'm gonna move it to a place, and I'm not sure if I need to go there or not, but I'm going to go there.
All right.
That in this upcoming election, when we understand that it's a strong likelihood that Trump can pull this off, right? We are hoping and praying for Kamala Harris. It's a strong likelihood. I think what I've just heard you say is that that's really not who we ought to be overly concerned about. Is that right?
We do need to be concerned about that.
Okay.
So we do need to be concerned about that, but we also need to be concerned about the local level. That if President Trump is reelected, the one way we can shield ourselves from whatever he puts forward is if we have control of our local area.
Okay.
If we have control over what's going on at the state. But just like the red states have found ways to shield themselves from Obamacare and things like that, we can find ways to shield ourselves from what's being put forward. So I'm not saying that national politics is not important. What I'm saying is that we spend so much time looking at something several thousand miles away that we ignore what's 20 feet away from us.
Okay, so I'm not even going to say that it's both and, because oftentimes it's not both and. Oftentimes we are more concerned about national elections,
Yes.
and we disregard local.
Yes.
We must be concerned about the national election. We need to go out and vote for who's going to be president. It will impact us in significant ways.
Yes.
But equally as great is our engagement in our local elections. That even with a Trump-Harris in office, that there's still something that we can do as we seek to govern ourselves, as we seek justice and all these other kinds of things that we can do if we are engaging politically on a local level.
Yes.
So we must do both.
Yes.
We must do both. We must be actively engaged in political systems and structures on both realms to have real impact and to make a difference if we are going to truly sort of adhere to that, what does the Lord require of me but to do justice, love, mercy, love, holy. To do that, we've got to be concerned about that on all levels, and understanding no one level is going to be end all be all and assure us anything.
Yeah, I agree fully, and I think the decay of some of the major denominations has played a factor in that, because when you have the major denominations, they would have a kind of a collection of individuals who might be able to collect information, say, okay, hey, look, here's what's going on the local level. We looked at these people, we vetted them, here's what's going on. And also at the state level, like they would be able to effectively pass this information along. But with the decay of these denominations, that communication isn't there.
Okay, I need you to do something. What do you mean when you say decay
So
of these major denominations?
So basically, we're seeing that the traditional black denominations are decreasing in size. So people are.
That's probably all of church, actually.
Yes. So if we think of like the 7 major black denominations, so the National Baptist Convention, USA, National Baptist Convention of America, Progressive National Baptist Convention, African Methodist Episcopal, African Methodist Episcopal Zion, Christian Methodist Episcopal, and the Church of God in Christ. These are kind of seen as the 7 major black denominations.
Okay.
And what we're seeing is these denominations are getting smaller because people aren't going. Either they're not going to church or they're moving to other churches. So a lot of, like a big movement in terms of non-denominational churches.
See, for me, that's another. We have created a new denomination.
Yeah.
That's what I feel. We've created a new denomination, and it's now non-denominationalism.
Yeah, the non-denominational churches look a whole lot alike. A lot of the people are trained, but we don't like labels. So people will say that they're independent, but really lean towards one party. We don't want labels like we used to.
We have a big Baptist church. Was that Northwest Austin, and they've taken off the label Baptist and just have the name they've taken off the label.
Yeah.
So they don't have to associate with. And again, I don't know. Is it because there's a sense that non-denominationalism is more engaging, or is it?
I think there's a lot of frustration with the way in which the church is operated, and a lot of people were unhappy with what they saw as a strongly authoritarian approach within churches. They wanted something new, And the non-denominational churches allowed you to do things your own way.
And it also, for some denominations, one I think in particular, allowed you to move away from the hardcoreness that was there.
Yeah.
And made it lighter and more embracing and easier for you to come. They wore the label non-denominational, but they were very true
Yes.
to the traditions. For which they, and if you didn't know what that tradition was, you said, "Oh my God, they're doing," but it was part of a denominational tradition.
Yes.
That had been practiced for years. You just weren't aware of it, and they could take off the name and be who they are, but without a name a little bit differently, and it was something new for the people who didn't know it.
Yeah, yeah, and they could repackage it however they want.
Yeah.
You know, I'm born and raised AME, and the fact that I know I can walk into any AME church and I know exactly what I'm doing in the service, that I know that what I'm doing today in 2024, my grandfather was doing 70 years ago.
Yeah.
And there might be a few tweaks here and there, but I'm part of. I'm continuing a history. And
It's something inherently significant about that too.
Yes.
There's something rich.
Yes.
About that as well. So just throwing that out.
Yeah. And so to me, I'm the denomination of Richard Allen. I'm the denomination of Henry McNeil Turner, of Denmark Vesey, of Rosa Parks. So to me, I'm a part of something that is important to me. I see myself as part of the black struggle, and so leaving the denomination that was so active in the struggle, to me seems, almost heretical. I mean, it's.
Yeah, and so that's and probably that's going to be another podcast, right? We probably going to another podcast. But certainly, as we look at the vote, the impact, the factors that have impacted politics in the black church, that somewhere there's responsibility in a lot of areas, pastors, congregants, as well.
Yes.
Right. But there are things that can be done. Engage ethically, accessing resources, coming from a place of knowledge.
Yes.
And understanding, for me, your responsibility as you profess to be a child of God, right? To understand the mandate and what that mandate means. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you so much.
What else would you add? And as we look at, I think you want me to subtly dig into the 2024 election, right? And thank you for that, understanding that yes, whoever wins is not the end all be all.
Yes.
The world's not going to fall apart, and we can maintain a sense of sensibilities if we engage on a local level.
Yes,
So-
that is a very critical thing. That a lot of these things can change if we're active at the local level, and if we turn out to vote on a regular basis and stay informed of the policies, there's a lot can happen. Because just thinking about at the state level, so 2 years from now when we will vote for Congress, the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general, if you are able to you were able to put a Democrat in either whether governor, lieutenant governor, or attorney general, you drastically change the politics in the state. All it takes is winning one of those statewide elections to drastically change the politics in the state, but we don't turn out.
Okay. So we want to encourage folk, vote.
Yes.
If you're not voting between now and the first is Friday.
Yeah.
Friday, early voting.
Yes, last day of early voting, yes.
Don't miss the 5th of November.
Yes.
And when this is all over, wherever the chips fall, and even as I'm believing that Kamala Harris will win this election, we still need to engage in our local elections going forward. This is a critical election, but so are the local elections.
Yeah.
And let's not forget that.
Oh yeah. Getting her elected is the easy part. Getting everything through, that's going to take even more work.
Okay. And that's reason to what?
Keep going. Demand that your churches are doing something. Demand that your institutions are doing something. Stay educated. There's, the good Lord invented the internet for a reason. And so let's start using it.
What's up with that? He created internet for a reason. Okay? It makes it a lot easier to connect and communicate.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of information out there that if we kind of take the time to look for it, we can find it, and really about 20 minutes a day. Just like you might want to do a workout, the same thing. It's something that will keep you aware of what's going on. And I realize it may not be the most interesting thing in the world, but keeping black children alive, making sure black children are educated, to me that's more interesting. If I know it only takes just a little bit every day, as a collective, we can make a huge impact.
Okay. Now I have to say thank you, because you've also preached me. I engage in national elections. I try to engage in local elections. And I have said, I've moved out to Pflugerville. I've been out there long enough to try to get involved. But I've moved out there, my garage goes up. I come out, I come to work, I go back, my garage goes up. That it's imperative that I learn what's happening in that community so that I can say, because some of the issues and concerns that our black children are having in the city, they're having in the burbs.
Yeah.
And if we don't raise our voices even there. So thank you. That's something that I've got to do where I live. So thank you, and my prayer is that on this day, that something has been said through this conversation that has pricked you, that in this critical election that we find ourselves in, that we vote. For me, I see it as, and I think I wrote an article for the Statesman, it was an editorial, our fiduciary responsibility, that we do it not only for ourselves, but we have a responsibility. I live in Pflugerville. I have a responsibility to those kids who goes to those schools in Pflugerville, and sometimes there are issues in those schools. I have a responsibility as a resident of Pflugerville to engage in those local elections. It's a responsibility. It's a responsibility that we should not take lightly. It's a responsibility that, in my estimation, as we look at Micah, is a mandate from God. I hope that you will go out and vote. I hope that you will not only vote in this 2024 presidential election, but as my good brother and new friend, Dr. McDaniel, has stated, that we also vote in our local elections once this is all over. Doctor.
Yes.
Thank you for being my new friend, man.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate you, man.
Oh, I'm happy to help out.
And
happy
thank
to be
you
here.
for coming out, because it really was a short notice. So I'm always grateful. So thank you. And we started another conversation. You know that, right? So I'm gonna get you back.
Okay.
So that we can really dig into that conversation. Sometimes I will go off when I teach a class.
Yeah.
I go off. It's okay, Reb, but we're gonna come back. I thought it important that we bring it back.
Okay.
But we're gonna get you back.
All right.
To finish that conversation that we kind of started. Is that cool?
Oh, hey, I'm more than happy to help out.
All right. Appreciate you, Doc. Thanks for being here, and thank you for helping us to ask those questions. This is What's Up With That, a podcast where we seek to engage in those hard conversations that are spiritual, religious, that helps us to be successful as we engage life. So join us in our next podcast as we ask the question, what's up with that? Be blessed.